The screeching brakes of the train filled the air as Mark lunged forward, his heart pounding like a war drum. The crowd on the platform gasped in unison, frozen in shock. Just inches from the edge, Mark's hand grabbed the stranger's coat, yanking him back from certain death. They both tumbled onto the platform floor, breathless. "Are you insane?" Mark shouted, his voice a mix of anger and relief. "You could have been killed!" The man, pale and trembling, stammered, I didn't see it coming. Thank you. You saved my life." Mark helped him to his feet, brushing off the dust. The stranger was in his mid-50s, well-dressed, but his shaken demeanor made him seem vulnerable. Before Mark could say more, the man pulled out a business card and pressed it into his hand. "I owe you everything. Please, call me if you ever need anything." Mark glanced at the card but pocketed it without a second thought. He wasn't interested in favors. He'd done what anyone should do. Hi, everyone, welcome to Soulful Stories. Channel, please like and subscribe for more stories. Let's start from beginning. Mark stood at the train station that evening, his hands buried in his coat pockets against the biting cold. He didn't have anywhere to be, not really. The job interview he'd just attended felt like another dead end. The manager had smiled politely and said they'd be in touch, but Mark recognized the brush-off. It was the same one he'd heard at least a dozen times in the past 2 months. Just a year ago, Mark's life had been stable, even promising. He'd worked as a marketing specialist at a mid-sized firm, had a modest apartment, and was paying off his car loan. But the company had downsized, and Mark had been one of the first to go. At first, he thought it was a temporary setback. He'd find something else. He was good at what he did after all. But as the weeks turned into months, reality hit hard. His savings dwindled faster than he'd anticipated. Unpaid bills began stacking up on his kitchen table like a taunting reminder of his failures. The landlord's friendly reminders were growing less friendly by the week. He'd even sold his guitar, the one thing that used to bring him peace, just to make ends meet. Mark felt like he was drowning, with no lifeline in sight. The train station, crowded and chaotic, mirrored his own mental state. He leaned against a pillar, staring blankly at the arrival board, wondering if life would ever get easier. That's when he noticed the man. Standing dangerously close to the platform's edge, the stranger seemed lost in thought, oblivious to the approaching train. Mark didn't hesitate. The desperate survival instinct that had kept him going kicked in, and he bolted forward. The next morning, Mark sat at his tiny kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of instant coffee. The sound of his neighbors arguing in the hallway seeped through the thin walls, adding to his already frayed nerves. His laptop screen flickered with job postings, each one more discouraging than the last. As he leaned back in his chair, exhausted from yet another fruitless search, something slipped out of his pocket and landed on the table with a soft thud. It was the business card the stranger had given him at the train station. Mark picked it up, turning it over in his hand. The card was sleek and professional, embossed with gold lettering, Richard Hayes, CEO, Hayes and Company Investments. Of course, Mark muttered to himself. Guy looks like he owns half the city. The memory of the previous evening played in his mind. The chaos, the adrenaline, and the look of sheer gratitude on Richard's face as he handed over the card. Mark shook his head. People like Richard didn't know what it was like to struggle, to scrape by, to lose sleep wondering how they'd pay rent. Still, there was something about the card that intrigued him. Maybe it was the weight of it in his hand, or the sharp contrast between Richard's world and his own. But mostly, it was the words Richard had said. "Call me if you ever need anything." Mark scoffed. What could a man like Richard possibly offer someone like him? A pat on the back? A thank you note? With a sigh, he tossed the card onto the counter and turned back to his laptop. He had bigger things to worry about than chasing after empty promises. But as the day went on, the card stayed in the back of his mind, whispering possibilities he wasn't ready to entertain. By midday, Mark had settled into a routine of rejection. His email inbox was a graveyard of automated responses. "We regret to inform you," or "after careful consideration." The words all blurred together now. He closed his laptop with a sigh, rubbed his eyes, and reached for the last sip of his now cold coffee. His phone buzzed, startling him out of his thoughts. An unknown number flashed across the screen. For a moment he debated ignoring it, probably another scam call, or worse, a debt collector. But something made him swipe to answer. "Hello?" he said cautiously. "Mark, this is Richard Hayes." Mark froze. The voice on the other end was calm but commanding, a stark contrast to the trembling man he had pulled from the edge of a train platform. Yeah, that's me. How are you?" Mark asked, his voice uncertain. I'm doing well, thanks to you, Richard said. Listen, I didn't get a chance to properly thank you yesterday, but you saved my life. I don't take that lightly. Mark shifted in his chair, unsure how to respond. I was just in the right place at the right time. Anyone would have done the same. I disagree, Richard replied firmly. Most people wouldn't have acted as quickly or as selflessly as you did. That's why I'm calling. I'm the CEO of Hayes & Company, and we're always looking for people with the kind of courage and quick thinking you showed yesterday. I'd like to offer you a position on my team. Mark blinked, stunned. Wait, what? A job? Yes, come to my office this afternoon and we'll discuss the details. Trust me, this is more than just gratitude. The line went silent as Mark tried to process what had just happened. Mark stared at his phone, the call still fresh in his mind. Did that really just happen? A job offer out of nowhere from a man he had met for barely a minute? It sounded too good to be true. In his experience, things that seemed too good usually were. He picked up Richard's business card from the counter and studied it. The bold, embossed letters seemed almost mocking. Hayes & Company Investments, a name he had vaguely heard before but couldn't place. Mark's mind raced with questions. What kind of position was Richard even offering, and why? Sure, he had saved the man's life, but offering a complete stranger a job just because of that? It didn't make sense. For all Richard knew, Mark could be completely unqualified. Or worse, a liability. Doubt gnawed at him. This is probably some rich guy's guilt talking, he muttered to himself. Maybe Richard just wanted to check off some moral obligation by giving him an interview, only to turn him down later. The thought of facing yet another rejection made Mark's stomach turn, and yet he couldn't shake the memory of Richard's voice. Steady, confident, and oddly sincere. This wasn't just an empty gesture. Richard believed in him, even though he barely knew him. Mark paced the room, the card still in his hand. If he ignored the call, nothing would change. He'd still be here, scrolling through job boards, barely scraping by. But if he went to the meeting, there was a chance, just a chance, that it could lead somewhere. Finally, he grabbed his coat and took a deep breath. What do I have to lose? He said aloud, trying to convince himself. With the card in his pocket and a mix of hope and fear in his chest, Mark headed out the door. Mark stepped into the towering skyscraper that housed Hayes & Company, feeling small beneath its gleaming glass facade. The revolving doors spun him into a lobby that looked like it belonged in a movie. Polished marble floors, sleek furniture, and an enormous chandelier that sparkled like a constellation. A receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "You must be Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Hayes is expecting you." She motioned toward a private elevator. Mark's heart pounded as he stepped inside. This wasn't like the places he had worked before, small offices with flickering lights and coffee makers that barely worked. This was a world he had never imagined being a part of. The elevator doors opened directly into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. Richard Hayes stood by his desk, looking nothing like the disoriented man Mark had saved at the train station. Today he was composed, his tailored suit and confident posture exuding authority. "Mark," Richard greeted him warmly, extending a hand. "I'm so glad you came." Mark shook his hand, trying to mask his nervousness. "Thank you for inviting me. This place is impressive," Richard chuckled. "It's just an office, but I'm glad you think so. Please, have a seat." Mark sat in a leather chair that was more comfortable than his couch at home. As Richard sat across from him, his expression turned serious. "I meant what I said on the phone. You showed incredible courage and quick thinking yesterday. That's exactly the kind of person I want on my team. Tell me about yourself, your skills, your experience." Mark hesitated, feeling out of place, but Richard's genuine interest encouraged him to speak. Slowly, he began sharing his story, unsure of where this conversation might lead. Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he listened intently to Mark's story. Mark recounted his career in marketing, his knack for problem-solving, and his dedication to every project he had worked on. But he didn't shy away from the hard truths either, the layoff, the struggle to find work, and the toll it had taken on him. "I'm not going to lie," Mark said, his voice faltering slightly. "It's been tough. I've been doing everything I can to stay afloat, but nothing seems to be working." Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You remind me of myself, you know. When I started this company, I wasn't handed anything. I had to fight for every opportunity. That fight, that resilience, is what I see in you." Mark blinked, caught off guard. You think I'm resilient?" "Absolutely," Richard said firmly. You didn't hesitate to save me yesterday, even when it put you at risk. That tells me you have courage, instinct, and the ability to act under pressure. Those qualities can't be taught. They're priceless. Mark swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. Richard leaned forward. Here's the deal. I have an opening for a project coordinator. It's not glamorous, but it's a solid position with room to grow. You'll be working directly with me and my team, learning the ropes of this industry. The salary is competitive and the benefits are comprehensive. What do you say? Mark's heart raced. The offer was more than he could have hoped for, a way out of his struggles and into a future he thought was out of reach. I don't know what to say, Mark stammered. Say yes, Richard said with a smile. Mark took a deep breath. Yes. If you enjoyed this story and want more motivational tales like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You never know when life's next big opportunity might be waiting for you, just like it was for Mark. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes one small act can change everything. Stay tuned for more stories that inspire and uplift.